case, and we can have more colleagues joining in. Welcome, everyone, once again, and good morning. Some of you have met me, but those who haven't, my name is Aarti Khosla. I'm based in Delhi. I'm part of a global network which works on climate change energy issues. It's called the Global Strategic Communications Council. I also represent Climate Trends, which is an agency that works at the interface of making the conversation on climate and energy from the margins to the mainstream. And it's with this intention that we've been working on some of the themes and practices over the last couple of years. The most recent one being EVs and transport decarbonization. Just to preface a little bit of what we are going to discuss today and how do we place it in the context of, some of the usual ways in which we approach our work. Essentially, I think, especially for the panelists here and all the participants, it's pretty known that electric vehicles is a necessary technology that must be adopted. For some of you, the reasons might be to look at it from the point of view of honoring India's climate commitments. For some of you, it's mostly from the rationale of looking at India's development and growth trajectory and how it will generate more jobs. For some organizations, the rationale is to look at decarbonizing one of the most carbon-intensive industries and seeing how it fits into the bigger game of net zero ambition, to a carbon neutral world. And I guess for some of us, it is simply looking at how we can connect the dots on all of this so that the key decisions and investments that are made in the next couple of years are quite in line with latest technology and innovation. And we are able to leapfrog our growth into something which is more in line with what the world should be in future. It's basically to connect all these dots that we have a good panel today. I want to welcome everybody who is on the panel. We have experts. We have Mr. Ranveer Singh from NITI Aayog, Mr. Randeep Pokela from Ether Energy, Akhilesh from Germany, Nitish from NRDC, and Abhinav from CEW. And each one of you, I know, have done a lot to be able to inform both people and policymakers about the need to progress towards an electric mobility transition. Welcome you all. Just in terms of how and what we are going to discuss today, as you saw in the agenda, Climate Trends about a couple of months back conducted a small public perception survey where we went ahead and spoke to buyers of and users of two-wheelers and four-wheeler electric vehicles across the country, and we mapped what their attitudes and understanding are. What are the myths that they feel are about electric vehicles, and what are the barriers that they feel are towards further adoption and mainstreaming of electric vehicles? To be honest, a lot of this conversation is not new for those of you who have been working in the sector, and it will come to you rather intuitively. But also our effort and intention with such an exercise and holding such a session is to make sure that we are also able to inform a wider public, so to speak, on the benefits of electric mobility. And we are able to stir some conversation among those who are not face to face with what EV technology has to offer and how it's actually a good deal today. So at this moment, I also want to mention that among a few things that we are doing, one of the things is also something called as the clean mobility shift. Madhulika can share more about this. Essentially, it's a platform, it's a new website, but it's a platform which is meant to track news and policy updates and technology updates and market developments that are enabling the shift to clean mobility. And to that extent, what we are trying to do is make sure that experts, researchers, analysts, and those who are passionate about the EV conversation have a place and a forum to come and discuss whatever they have to input into the conversation on electric vehicles in India, but with a view to informing the wider general public on its uptake and the transition to electric mobility. So pretty much what we are trying to do is offer clean mobility shift as some kind of a platform which can help with faster adoption of electric vehicles among consumers. This survey is a very small attempt to be trying to push the narrative of consumer adoption, myths and barriers, but at the same time taking it to a place where we can have experts like yourself come face to face with the general public, the target audience, which is the buyers and the consumers, so that the discussion can be more informed. In the end, like I said, this is going to be a small experimental step, and we will see how this conversation, can take on from here. Because with our little experience of having worked in the power sector, and we also have worked for quite some time, that conversation is very different. The decision makers there are utilities and discoms and ERCs and state energy departments and so forth. But our personal feeling is that in the electric vehicle transition space, there is a lot that needs to be done to see how the consumer segment shakes out, and which is why it's important not just to have manufacturers and corporates and state governments talk about EV policies and plans. It's equally important to also drive some demand from the bottom up and therefore have an informed consumer base. And that's what our intention is. Maybe I will pause at this moment and quickly hand over first. I'm checking. I think first we have Randir, you speaking. After that, we have the presentation. And essentially, given that Niti has been so much at the forefront of making a strong case for India's transition to electric mobility, it'll be nice if you could just set the context on what do you think is Niti's key analysis on electric mobility, and what are the key decisions or investments that must be taken to quickly scale up the electrification of transport in India in the next 10 years, given all the considerations of next 10 years being the critical years of climate action, decarbonization, moving towards net zero, and moving away from carbon intensive industry and technology. So over to you. Please feel free to bring in whatever key points and messages you would like, especially for an audience and a session like this.
Thank you, Aarti. And I think there's a lot which can be said about the EV, and a lot of things has already been done by the government. I'll try to bring about in a short period of time the sum of the perspectives, and also what are the triggers and barriers for the adoption of electric vehicles, which is, I think, also the part of your study. So maybe I'll start with the quote by the Thomas Fuller that all things are difficult before they are easy. In fact, what I see is similar is the situation of EV, or so to say, new technology adoption in our country. We as a country needs to tap this into this sector in a big way. The inflection point will reach in a couple of years when battery prices are going to be around $100 per kilowatt hour. Already the prices in 2021 has beginning to touch around $135 per kilowatt hour. Of course, after the launch of this advanced chemistry cells program, which is a PLI with 18,100 crores, and so I'm also leading this particular program. Soon you will see the RFQ will be out, and we are seeing that this, because these prices, this $135 per kilowatt hour, in next 22 years $100 per kilowatt hour, these are for the big factories having more than 10 gigawatt hour of the capacity. This is based on the analysis done by the BNF. So these are not very much prevalent right now in India. So to have these economies of scale and all those things, we need to have such a big program. This program is for 50 gigawatt hour. And at this program, with this level of the production, the economies still can be reached, and we will also reach to the same price points, which is right now running around $165 to $200 per kilowatt hour in our country. According to a recent study by consultancy firm EY, around 40% of motorists are now considering switching to an EV when they make their next purchase. And the main reasons encouraging drivers to go electric are the environmental protection, which is around 49%, as well as the financial incentives available, the subsidies, the range, and the available charging infrastructure. And of course, unsurprisingly, drivers' biggest concern is the cost of ownership. One of the most striking measures of the Green Deal unveiled by the European Commission concerns the obligation for the manufacturers to stop producing new internal combustion engines by 2035. Indeed, in Europe and elsewhere, today's Saptics will probably have little choice but to switch to EV in the coming years. And same may be the situation to our country also. And major challenges for the EV market in India is the inadequate, in fact, sorry, charging infrastructure. And I will actually say why I said in particular the adequate, the next part of this: range anxiety, high price for EVs, lack of options for the high performance. So each of these has been addressed in one or the other way more specifically. So the first part, instead of inadequate, why it is adequate charging infrastructure. The first part is India is 81% two-wheeler market and 3% three-wheeler market. The average running for these two and three wheelers is 17 to 21 kilometers. And under FAME 2, whatever vehicles are approved, the minimum range is around 80 kilometers with a minimum speed of 45 kilometers per hour. So you see that for a daily commute, almost 90 to 98% of your daily commute by two wheelers is already covered in the minimum range available for the vehicles. So you can do the charging at home, you can do the charging in your offices, because this is just a 5 ampere plug point. You put the charging and it can be done. So for that, the building bylaws has also been changed, that 20% of the EV infra parking has to be reserved for the new upcoming buildings, RWAs and all. And 1,000 crores are being capped in the FAME 2 for the charging infrastructure. These are already been tendered, and for every 25 kilometer on either side of highways, a slow charger will be put and one fast charger at every 100 kilometers. In urban areas and urban settlements on a 3x3 grid, at least one charging point is accessible. So one point to be noted here is this: I'm not focusing on the charging station. The focus here is on charging points, because charging stations are mainly catering to the four-wheelers, but our focus is on the two-wheeler, three-wheeler, and of course the buses. Next part is about the standardization. So why standardization is required for the EV charging infrastructure? First of all, it's optimum utilization, interoperability, consumer flexibility, and of course the fast market reach. Setting vehicle and charger standards are prerequisite for wide electric vehicle adoption. In fact, in the early stages of deployment at which we are currently, the public procurement schemes, for example, for buses, municipal vehicles, the one which we have launched in an OPEX model under the FAME 2, have the double benefit of first, demonstrating the technology to the public, and second, providing the opportunity for public authorities to lead by example. And first of all, importantly, they also allow the industry to produce and deliver bulk orders to foster economies of scale. In fact, recently, last month, we did the remodeling of the FAME 2 on the basis of the learnings after the COVID, because in 2019, when it was launched, immediately in around October, it was launched. And from the March onwards, we are continuously seeing the wave 1 and the wave 2. So this has not taken off in a way it was envisaged. So of course, the extension has been done, and we also did the remodeling. Under this remodeling, three things has been done. One thing is, for the two-wheelers, the subsidy has been increased from 10,000 per kilowatt hour to 15,000 per kilowatt hour. And 20% cap has been increased to the 40%. So a vehicle with a 3 kilowatt hour battery will get a benefit of around 45,000 from the central government itself. And after that, over and above this will be the state government. And second part is on three-wheelers. In three-wheelers, and in fact the buses also, we have played on the the aggregation model. So when you go for the aggregation, around 20 to 25% reduction is seen. In fact, when we have gone for the aggregation of the LED bulbs, 80% reduction of price has happened. So we are going to play on the aggregation for these two things. For the buses, the focus is going to be the 4 million plus population cities. Those 9 major cities are going to be flooded with the EV vehicles. In fact, that is what the change in the EV and the remodeled FAME 2 you will also see. That EESL is going to do a large procurement, so that the overall aggregation model will result in the reduction of the overall prices, and of course the synergy across the market in terms of the vehicles available. We also need to, what we have to do to make people aware why they should switch to EV. So environment is one aspect, but another aspect which everybody wants to know is about the financial impact. So we need to also tell them the total cost of ownership. Of course, the cost parity is already there in 2 and 3 vehicle. And for buses, the incentive structure is very solid to boost now in FAME 2. So ambitious policy announcements have been critical in stimulating the electric vehicle rollout in major vehicle markets in recent years, including India. So in coming years, indication of continuing shift from the direct subsidies to policy approaches, because we cannot continue these subsidies and other things, to policy approaches that rely more on regulatory and other structural measures. These measures could be including zero emission vehicle mandates, fuel economy standards. This has to be set very clearly. So long-term signals is to the auto industry and the consumers that this transition has to happen in a sustainable manner. In fact, the 9 countries had more than 1 lakh electric cars on the road already. And at least 20 countries have reached the market shares above 1%. So all in all, the reducing gap is in cost of ownership between electric and other technology platforms, and the increasing segment of the consumers vocal about the environmental impact, coupled with government policies favoring EV, will drive a fundamental change in consumer buying behavior for electric vehicles. Finally, there are signals that recovery measures to tackle the COVID-19 crisis will continue to focus on vehicle efficiency in general and electrification in particular. And I must congratulate you for this study, and such initiatives are required to keep a tab on the developments in this area and do the course correction from all concerned corners. Thank you, Aarti, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Randir. I think there's lots in there that you said. I don't really need to paraphrase, but maybe in the panel we will talk about some of the things like the total cost of ownership, how, even for example, in the power sector, a lot did happen when the prices of solar panels dropped. So when you have deflationary pricing of battery, which is quite a fundamental cost element, maybe, the transition will happen naturally. If I have time, maybe I can ask you two things. One, a lot of states are coming up with their policies, and some have a push on manufacturing, some have a push on, talking about it in the framework of jobs. Given that in the end, everything is one ecosystem and, we are looking at one country, how do we make sure that just the policies of states are not counterintuitive to each other, but they are indeed complementary? And my second question is the nice thing that you said about the ESL public procurement model. And we know in the end, the change that it brought about across the country with the LED pricing coming down to just very, very low. And if that's something that NITI and ESL will really push, in my limited view, that's going to be an absolute game changer, more than what we imagine. What is your vision of this?
Thank you, Aarti. In fact, you asked about the EV policy. So I'm also leading a program from NITI. We are running a program called EV Policy Accelerator Program. So this was started last year, wherein we are helping the states which are at different stages of their EV policies. Maybe some of them, even if they have launched the policies like Maharashtra and Karnataka, we are helping them to come out with a policy which clearly shows the USP of that particular state. It shouldn't happen that somebody is coming to India and they are finding 36, 37 India, that they have to choose between where to go and where to put their factory, from where they should start. If some battery manufacturer is coming, they should have very clear idea that these are the four, the big states. These are the 4 states which are giving me the maximum incentives, maximum the trunk infrastructure. If some electronic manufacturer is coming, he should know that these are the places wherein I have to focus. So that's what we are doing from the NITI side, that now states are releasing their policies. In fact, you might have seen that 2 weeks back, Maharashtra have released their EV policy. We selected 3 lighthouse states and the Maharashtra was the first one. Second is the Karnataka and third is Himachal Pradesh. Soon you will see that others are also going to launch their EV policies. So the focus is that they should not compete, but they should, compete on their own strengths, which are not present otherwhere. So that it should not happen that Maharashtra is competing with Karnataka to attract the investment. They should have their own, somebody should be focusing on the R&D, somebody should be focusing on the components, somebody should be focusing on the battery part, and somebody should be focusing on the demand creation. So all, adoption also needs to happen. Not everybody would say, come here and the manufacture, where all these things has to be absorbed. So this is what we have ascertained and doing in this EV Policy Accelerator program, to make sure that states compete. There should be healthy competition, but it shouldn't happen that there are 36 states available for any investor to come in this EV policy, in EV domain. So these policies are unique and the USPs of each and every state. This is what we are making sure. This is one. Coming to your second part, this ESL part. So this aggregation, this gazette notification has already been released. ESL has already done the MOU with many states, including the Pune, including the Kerala, and there are other states also. So they have already done the MOU. They're already in talks with the industry, and of course, ESL is going to lead it from the front, because now even in the gazette notification, we have notified that ESL is going to do the aggregation for the bus, for the three-wheelers, so that from the safety perspective, the vehicle which is being procured in three-wheeler segment, I'm saying in particular, where the concerns are that L5 model is to be procured or the E-rig to be procured as per the ARAI standards, that is what's going to be ascertained, plus the overall upfront cost will go down. In the OPEX model, the concerns which were there earlier regarding the buses, the tenders are not going to, not finalizing, the OEMs are not coming forward to the operate and all these things, those have been taken care when the ESL is coming into picture. And the bulk procurement in general will also result into the overall cost reduction. This is of course a game changer, as you rightly said, and that's how on the basis of the learnings we brought about this change.
Understood, and thanks for this. Let's bring this back when we have the panel. But for the moment, Madhulika, I'll pass it on to you to take everyone through the research and the findings.
Yeah, thanks, Aarti, and thanks, Andeep. I'm just sharing my screen. I hope is it visible
Yes.
to, yeah. So thank you, Aarti and Mr. Singh, for setting the context. I'll not take much time further to and jump straight to the objective. Like Aarti already mentioned, the objective of conducting this survey. EV system, EV is a new space, and since it is a growing and nascent market, so a lot of focus is on policy and infrastructure side. But we thought that at this given point in time, it's a good space to bring consumer objective into the picture. So we conducted an online survey in 3 zones: north, south, and west zone. This is the online survey, and the objective is to understand the attitude, behavior towards EV, identifying the existing myths with charging and range and price parity and that exist around them, and what are the barriers to adoption, and engage. And ultimately, the point was to engage with the end users to understand their experience, because a lot of myths is tightened around and it can be busted when you hear directly from the horse's mouth. So this like I said, this survey was conducted in both 4-wheelers and 2-wheelers. This is the research specs look like. So we reached out to around 491 respondent for 4-wheelers, and further there were acceptors and rejectors. And in 2-wheelers, there was a clear distinction between the EV 2-wheeler owner versus combustion ICE vehicle, ICE bike owners. Um, um, Basically, I would just also like to draw attention that in the 4-wheeler segment, the acceptors were the end users who are actually using the car, and also the intenders who, in coming 2 years, they were having an intention of investing in car. So what are certain important, I would like to start with the highlight of the survey. Like sir also mentioned, Randeep sir, that there was it was very strange to see that people are actually very environmental consciousness. So hence in both these segments, environmental consciousness was rated really high, somewhere around 86 to 83%. And people were also showed interest, say that they invested in EV because they believe that this will help in reducing the air pollution. They were, especially in the 4-wheeler segment, they were excited about the new technology, like advanced and smart technology leading are the key triggers for them to invest in EVs. They we know that there are a lot of barriers that are existing, and it did not come as a surprise when people say that they need frequent charging infrastructure. Those are the existing myth that has been there for long now, and it was related to range, charging, and lack of infrastructure. But interestingly, people who are actually using the EV, the end user, they exhibited high level of satisfaction with the charging experience, to an extent like out of 10 people, 7 people said that they don't really find charging as a hassle. So this further evidence is to break the common myth around the charging infrastructure. People, because who are actually using it, they're not really finding it difficult. And what really came as a point was the resale value and pickup power, because this clearly is coming with a lot of misconception. But this is one of the two important things that was pointed as a barrier by the rejector group. They said that they don't really feel confident about the resale value of the EVs, and also they said that pickup power is a concern. So pickup, I mean, we know whatever tech in technical term, EV will always have a quick pickup power. So this is clearly coming from a point where they are not aware much of a technology. They are the So I'll start with the four-wheeler segment. Like I said that it was four-wheeler segment was more likely to be the end users are male and older in age. This is just to give you the picture of the sense of the people who are the end users and intenders. So out of 49% acceptors, 19% are the end users of EV who already own the car, and 81% are intenders, as in they will, when they buy the car, they are going to be EVs are likely to be their choice. What is interesting is that 17% of the rejectors who don't own the car right now, they said that even if they buy, EV is not going to be their preferred choice. And overall EV penetration was 9%. And this is yeah. And in the two-wheeler segment, we saw there was a direct comparison between the owners and the ICE owners. So 47% EV owners versus 53% of ICE owners. They said that who are using the EV, they are using it for their daily purpose and for the longer duration and longer distance. Um, Yes. Yeah. So these are the certain comparison that we did. The comparison so the question that we posed is, how would you rate an electric car on the following aspect as compared to the conventional car? So these are the certain responses that we got. So it's very encouraging, because also from the decarbonization perspective, we see people are aware who are using electric vehicle. They are conscious of environment, and they rated in both the segment, they rated EVs to be very higher. They believe that it is eco-friendly with compared to the fuel car. And and they also in the four-wheeler segment, we also saw that people are obviously rating EV, and they are satisfied with their smart features, advanced features like automatic headlights, keyless ignition, and safety features. Those are certain things which are very which was interesting for the four-wheelers segment. And in the two-wheeler, it is more like it was more in terms of rated the EV two-wheeler were rated high on value, warranty, overall look and feel of the vehicle. And yeah, and so these are based on these parameters. So therefore they considered the switching and making the transition to EV. So like I said before, 57 and 50% people believe that it is EV is environmentally it will be it's sensitive, and it will help. Interesting is that people are also factoring reducing air pollution. If they are making the transition, they are willing to make the transition, or they have already made the transition, because they believe that driving a car does contribute to the vehicular emission, and hence using EV will reduce pollution. There was certain segment which is already, like I mentioned in the earlier slide, the new technology is is a point of enthusiasm for this. This is important because we often hear that, you know, technology is a barrier, and they are the new, the people don't believe in new technology. When we were talking, when we this result, when we saw, we really believe that people who are actually using the electric vehicle are actually liking the new technology, and the look and feel of the EVs are something which is actually attracting them. um, these are the things which the end users has to say, but still we know that it's just 1% the market share right now. EVs only is 1%, so obviously there are a lot of barriers which is attached to it. So we also thought that we should be talking and seeing and do a little bit of deep diving in the what are the barriers. So when we were going through the values, the respondents response, so we thought that the negative perception was two things that came out was resale value and pickup power. So this is something which is like also like a new angle for us also, because resale value, people believed in the four-wheeler segment, 16% of the actual car owners and intenders said that they have they sorry the people who rejected EVs, they cited that resale value and the pickup power, they have a concern in that. So hence they did not really feel up to they are not there yet, because they feel that they will not get better resale for their when they will not get a resale value for this. So basically the question that we put was that how do you rate an electric car on the following aspect as compared to conventional. So these are the two common point that came out really like striking in by the respondent. So this also gives us a clear indication that OEM should be running some sort of awareness, and clear communication and education needs to happen where we address these both concerns. So what are the other key reasons for the rejection? So basically we have already, so there has been an inherent barrier which we have been pointing and dealing, related to range anxiety, lack of infrastructure support, need of better charging, and what are the finances and incentives. So this slide does reflect on each one of the aspect, like electric cars are less reliable for longer drive, which is the range anxiety. And in four-wheeler segment, 65% rejectors does highlighted this versus 43% in two-wheelers. And similarly, electric cars are charging, they're finding charging as a hassle, is also being highlighted. 50% rejectors does cite charging hassle as a biggest barrier for adoption. And I think electric car is charging. The two-wheeler segment also face the similar kind of threats and barriers for their adopt for not investing in EV cars. So this is something which we found that it's something which has been there, which we are already hearing and listening and for a longer time when it comes to EV. So we thought that let's see what the end users has to say, people who are actually using the electric vehicle. And this is a very positive slide. This people who are actually using the four-wheelers and two-wheelers EV, the base here I would like to highlight, the base here is 46 in four-wheelers, but these are real-time users, 46 people who are using the car for their daily commuting, versus along with the 151 actual EV bike users. They said 70% of them, they believe that they have sufficient charging station. Like sir has also mentioned that, it is used when you're using it for the home charging. It is, I mean, for the range also, if you compare, this charging, the home charging is sufficient. So this is also what is reflected in our survey. So 70% of them believe that the charging station is sufficient. Very few 26% in the four-wheeler segment, they said that there are few charging station, but it is absolutely manageable. In the two-wheeler segment, it is said that 43% cited that it is the charging is enough. The experience also, they were rated very highly. They said that 46% in four-wheeler segment said that it's very easy, versus 39% in two-wheeler believed it to be easy. So this gives us a understanding that people who are actually using the electric vehicle are not they are not finding range or charging as a concern. And what is on the last my last point, this is actually a very good thing that came out, is that recommendation. So we know word of mouth and suggestion plays a very key role when it comes to attitude and behavior and mindset of a consumer. So in four wheeler segment, 96% people said that they are going to recommend highly electric vehicle, they are going to recommend it. And in EV, they said in the two wheeler, they said that 83% of them said that they are going to recommend a two wheeler to EV to two wheelers. So I would end with a line that this is a testament to a strong customer experience and can be used as a consumer, as an awareness for further EV adoption. Thank you.
Thanks, Madhulika, and thanks for the interesting presentation and insights. I think lots comes out here, but few obvious things come out as well on how the boom in two-wheelers has pretty much happened and is quite underway, but also the fact that how people feel that there are things about resale value which I think really need some kind of an honest answer, that how do you address that thing, especially when a resale value of a car is an important consideration in buying. And the fact that actually a lot of users indeed feel that charging is not inadequate, but as somebody who has not used an EV before, that's the biggest myth that you have, that there isn't enough charging that is available. So I think there is a lot of intersection between how to deal with a lot of the messaging here. Let's maybe move into the panel and hear from our experts on what's their view on all of this. And I will invite our speakers to just share their own.
Arti, can I ask before?
Go on. Yeah.
I just want to ask one question. Madhulika, first of all, very good presentation and good survey. Two things. One thing is, I think in terms of the sample, I would request very good findings. In fact, of course, some of them are intuitive, but some are revealing also in terms of the four-wheelers, when 96% are saying that it's sufficient. So I would urge that maybe you should also do this survey with a wider audience. Something 2,500 plus, the respondents, plus focus on the clusters. The clusters wherever the EV charging infrastructure is either very heavy or it's very scant. So you should segregate in that way also. So those two things, if you can do, maybe I would be interested to, further talk to you of this seminar, and please share those with, I think Chaya is already in touch with your team. So please share with her. And first of all, and congratulations. Thank you very much. Thanks, Aarti, for giving me time.
Thanks very much, Randy, for joining, and very happy to talk to you and on how to do this better. I know that, even Akhilesh had a point early when we were talking that this should be with a slightly larger group of people. And I remember that, I think we were constrained by just going to potential EV buyers for four-wheelers. But if there are some clusters that we can look at, or just to broaden the survey, then actually this same survey can be expanded, and I think we should explore that. But, coming back to the point about two-wheelers, Ravneet, and by the way, just for everybody, Ravneet Kokela does everything to do with marketing at Ather Energy, which is quite at the cutting edge of new technology and innovation on two-wheelers. Ravneet, what's your view? I mean, the EV market is naturally picking up for two-wheelers, and the way you are seeing it, it just might feel quite natural at this stage to buy a two-wheeler, and it definitely should be electric. There was also a point that was made about charging hassle, and either on your website it says not more than 4 kilometers away from a charging point. How does all of this come together in terms of what do you see as opportunities and what do you see as barriers and challenges from a manufacturer's point of view? And anything that you can you can share on how to address the point really about consumer perception of EVs having low resale value simply because it emerged as a major point.
Right. So, so I think the findings are fairly in line with what what we've been seeing in the market, except maybe a couple of areas where we have a slightly divergent view, and I'll explain what that view is and why we believe slightly differently. But I think the point that Randy made earlier, it essentially reflects the larger understanding we have of the ecosystem as well. So if you look at reasons today where people say, and I so there, we believe there's a gap between when people say why we buy EVs as opposed to why they genuinely buy EVs, right? And we've seen that in a lot of categories, and this is not different because in surveys, a lot of things are said because they're just the right thing to say. Now, if the existing hypothesis, which the industry has been working with for a while, is that TCO and environment friendliness are two key factors, then we've been selling. If I limit my discussion in this case to two-wheelers, we've been selling two-wheelers for the past 12, 11, 12 years in this country. We should be selling millions by now, right? People understand that it's good for the environment. People understand it's good, and there's good TCO here. Obviously, there is, these are important reasons, but not important enough to drive the adoption, which is why it hasn't happened, right? We've been hovering, and we've been not hovering, we've been languishing at sub 1% penetration, right? So clearly, these are reasons that people care about, but certainly not enough for them to switch over from a petrol to a electric, right? And one big driver is that till quite recently, switching to electric meant that you have to compromise on what a vehicle does for you, right? In terms of performance, in terms of drive feel, in terms of build quality, in terms of a bunch of other things, right? Which means if somebody really has to care a lot about the environment, so as to fundamentally compromise on what a vehicle is meant to do, right? Very few people are eco warriors, like to say that I'll compromise everything because I will desperately go electric. For the most part, average consumer wants a great product. In the process, you save the world. That's fantastic, right? They would rather do that. But fundamentally, the vehicle have to have certain parity. So today, a big issue if you look at from an adoption perspective, frankly, is not demand at all. It's not awareness. There are now people out there who understand EVs, why it makes sense, and all that. A fundamental issue is a lack of credible supply. And I think Randeep mentioned about performance products, which is what has been sort of at a policy level being addressed in the FAME policy, where there's a minimum threshold defined for qualification even for a FAME subsidy. Now today, if you look at contrast the electric vehicle market with a petrol market, and again pick up randomly any category, pick up cars, pick up two-wheelers, pick up motorbikes. Like if I give you 10 lakhs or if I give you 20 lakhs to buy a car in petrol, you have 40 options, maybe 35 or 50 options, right? How many options do you have in cars? Two, maybe three. If I give you 1.5 lakh to buy a good credible scooter in petrol, you have like what, 20 options? How many options do you have in EV? Minimal. Petrol in motorbikes, nothing. So when we start judging the demand based on what the industry is selling, we misjudge the entire industry because it is not a true reflection of demand. It's just a reflection of a lack of credible supply, credible choices that people don't have today, right? Which is why the moment a half decent product comes in, you suddenly see an uptick in the industry, right? So which is why I'm not surprised, that the from a survey perspective, people are very predisposed positively towards the category, because they and importantly, people who are aware of the category, they see it as an upgrade, not as just just a switching of apples to apples from petrol to electric. And the moment you see anything as an upgrade, your price perception and how you evaluate price changes. It's like you move from a feature phone to a smartphone. You don't say, hey, how expensive is vis-a-vis that? Because it's fundamentally a different category, right? So a lot of people, and it comes across that people talk about, technology as a reason for shifting in addition to environment. That's what a survey also said. Technology not for its own sake. So technology for the fact that it's a new age vehicle, it's a better vehicle, it's smart, it's connected, it has a bunch of things that existing vehicles don't offer, and therefore this is where the world is moving, right? And the moment and the only way to wean people away from petrol to electric, sure, you have to tick all the boxes on pricing, etc. But it's fundamentally the vehicle have to be at the very least equal, ideally better in performance than petrol. no category shifted for nobody downgrades, right? Nobody moves, from one to the other category for the parity or a lower product, which is what the industry has been grappling with for the last 10, 12 years or so, where for the most part, products that were there are not, they weren't really credible substitutes for petrol vehicles. And petrol vehicles, by the way, are fantastic vehicles. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them, right? They are great vehicles. So if you have to wean somebody away, you have to give them a really, really damn good reason, right? And like I said, TCO is important, but it's not the overriding reason. If it was, then we should be selling a lot, right? So what you've seen in the recent past, I think two big changes have happened. One is on the policy front, on the from a subsidy perspective, and a bunch of other things. I think the government has done a lot. Frankly, the government has done a lot more than the industry ever expected the government to do, right? Especially with the recent increase in subsidy from a FAME perspective and state governments sort of topping up, on top of that, right? And right now, the ball is fairly and squarely in the court of OEMs. I don't think there is anything we expect the government to do more than what they already have done, right? Whether it's a subsidy, whether it's the PLI scheme, whether not just the subsidy in terms of the money allocation, but also the structure of the policy that drives localization, drives local production, drives local supply chain, ensures that suboptimal products don't get subsidies. So a bunch of things at a policy level have happened that have pushed the industry in the right direction. So I think that's why you see tailwind, right? So pricing is TCO always had worked out. Now, in addition to TCO, even the sticker price is parity with petrol. So TCO is working out from day one as opposed to a 24 or 36-month TCO. So if TCO is working out, gradually, OEMs are jumping in with credible and strong products. There is, you're staring at a classic hockey stick growth where suddenly you see the graph going like this. We are the cusp of that, right? You can feel it in your under your skin if you're in this business, right? We're really sitting there. We're looking at growth, looking at 10, 15, 20x growth, like every 2 years or so. So it's going to be like a blazing growth. And the only thing that can come in the way of us meeting where the demand is essentially is the ability of the supply chain to scale up, because we do not have a strong supply chain in this country, right? Because it's a nascent category, not enough investments have been made so far. Investments have been made with a reasonably pessimistic view of the market, which was incorrect. And supply chain is not something that you can, overnight scale up. It takes a long time to build capacity, and that's what we're grappling with. And in addition to a fundamental issue with supply chain not being at the maturity level and the scale that we need, we have another large problem of electronic shortage, chip shortage across the world. So whether it's vehicles, whether it's mobile phones, whether electronics, everybody's today, in this industry, we have to place orders 52, 56, 58 weeks in advance. So I am today having to order my electronics anticipating a 1 year demand. Now we can do that because we're a startup and we sort of work with that dynamic, right? We just learn to do it. But if you look at more mature players in the petrol world, their systems for the longest time are geared towards a 15, 20-day cycle, right? Today I place an order in like 25 days. They're not geared to think like 12 months ahead, right? Because it's just not how they're sort of structured. And no fault of theirs, because that's what the industry has been, right? So supply chain, I think, going to be the single biggest bummer, if at all, the industry doesn't take off the way it's expected to, right? And the only thing on the other thing, couple of things that you've sort of raised around consumer issues around resale value and a bunch of others. So two issues sort of came up, right? One is specifically about pickup. Pickup, when you say pickup, I read pickup as overall performance and technology and build quality and a bunch of other things, which I think inherently electrics are better placed to do. It's ironic that people cite pickup as a reason for not going electric, because fundamentally there is nothing quicker than in the market than electric vehicle. Look at a Tesla, look at something else. It's a rocket. Like, it's sometimes you feel it's unsafe for a consumer world, right? So I think that's really a question of just good product coming in and dispelling that myth in the market, right? Resale is a concern that has come up, and the resale has come really triggered by two things. One is what people either experience personally in the vehicles that till quite recently were selling in the market in terms of quality, etc., where you can clearly see that this is not going to find any resale market. And second is because the financiers are refusing to finance vehicles, because if they are to repossess, there really wasn't any value in that product. It was like a piece of plastic, right? So so there's a good reason why people are nervous about resale, because like I said, a lot of products sold to us recently weren't genuinely good products that would command any resale value, which again it starts changing with better products coming in, credible products coming in, bigger players coming in with strong products. And so we had the same issue, and we sort of started scaling up last year. And we said, the only way to do it is to put your money where your mouth is. So we have a buyback policy. So we have two variants. One sells at 1,25,000, one sells at 1,45,000. And we said after 3 years, there's a buyback guarantee that we have of 75K and 85K, depending on which variant have you bought. Obviously, it's subject to you haven't bashed it up and all that. Those are obviously the requirements. But if everything is fine, we just buy it back off you, because we believe at that point in time, the misconceptions about this lack of buyback, lack of resale market would have gone away. And it's not that we're doing anybody a favor by offering buyback. We do believe that the market value is going to be higher than today what we give as a buyback value. But what it does is it gives consumers a lot of confidence that if somebody believes that, hey, listen, I'm not sure about this, should I go electric? Looks fine, but what if I don't like it? What if I have to sell it? What happens in the market? You take the fear out of the equation, and suddenly you see people jumping and saying, what's my downside? Like, worst comes to worst, let's see if I made a mistake. 3 years later, I'll get my money back, right? 50%, 60% money back. So I think there are, if I just encapsulate what I said, I think there are certain myths that consumers were living with, which are getting dispelled as we're scaling up. Demand is not a problem. Charging infra is not a problem. Charging infra is a red herring when it comes to these discussions. People do overnight charging. We have free public charging. So we have about 50 locations in Bangalore. We don't charge a penny for charging. Anybody can go and charge. Despite that, only 4% charging happens in public because people do overnight charging at home. It's like a mobile phone, right? So, whenever somebody says, what charging infrastructure is not there, therefore, the market is not growing, that's not true at all. That's not what our belief is, right? And yeah, I guess pretty much covered all the points.
Lots of them, Ravneet, and I think certainly the point that you made about this survey capturing the sentiment that a lot of people will do things for environmental friendliness is indeed not true. I think we've seen it that any consumer will try and map the cost benefit, and only if it makes sense will somebody buy an electric two-wheeler, and that actually translates to everything to do with a green product, that people will not just buy green, especially in our country, which is so price conscious. Maybe you will have a very small segment of the market, but if you have to go from the margin to the mainstream, then it has to really be extremely cost competitive for a lot of people. But I thought you also made other extremely significant points, but to say that demand is not a problem, but supply is, and the second point that you said, that charging is not a problem, and my limited understanding of the news reports and what the other organizations are doing on the matter, there is always lots of discussion on financing for charging infrastructure, siting of charging infrastructure. And if people really, the preference is that, you do overnight charging at home, how can you further simplify it? I think those are things that have to be broken down from the point at where they are right now. Because right now it's a very clear understanding that, charging is a clear understanding among those who are not using EVs, that charging is really a big problem. And if I have to go out on a highway, even if I have to do it 3 or 4 times a year, how should I invest in a car which is electric, and what does, how does that shake out for me? Maybe I bring in Nitish because we've seen that NRDC has worked quite a lot on the point about charging infrastructure, and there is a body of work that you've done in terms of figuring out whether charging is adequate or whether standardization is needed. Some of it has been addressed by Ravneet and also by Nandit before. But in your view, do you still see any hurdles across the debate on charging with respect to electric vehicles, or that is mostly settled?
Sure. Many thanks, Aarti. I think this survey has been insightful, and as I would align with Ravneet, the majority of the findings are aligned with how the market has been or the ecosystem has been shaping up. Embracing this consumer perceptions and their usage pattern is necessary as we build up the charging infrastructure. Now, before jumping in the debate whether it has been adequate or inadequate, and whether the standardization part is needed or not, I think then what is misplaced here is we need to break this into the map, the kind of form factors, the charging needs or charging technologies, and then plan for it. For example, Randeep did highlight that majority of the Indian market, 84% sales comes from ICE two-wheelers and three-wheelers. But what are the discussions around charging infrastructure have been around the DC001 or the global standards. So I'll break these parts and I'll try sharing our perspectives. I think the basic myth that the survey tries to resolve is that there has been a thinking that you need more, since charging takes more time, you need more charging points than a fuel pumps for excite people to go electric. So I think that's not there. Home charging, as Ravneet has also highlighted, is a critical for embracing these EV perceptions. But when I move to before standardization, so charging technologies, you can look at the plug-in charging technologies and the battery swaps for 2 and 3 wheelers. For 2 and 3 wheelers, there are hardly any international standards, and DST along with Niti Aayog has done a fair bit job rolling out Bharat AC001 charge, and now there is also a new standard coming in, which is even low cost, which is the DST is targeting rupees 3,500 plus charging per charging point, which is a low cost AC charge. So I think for the 2 wheelers and 3 wheelers, the plug-in charging is pretty much sorted. And the standardization and the only thing that we vehicle OEMs are aligning now is on the interoperability aspect. So standardization puzzle there isn't a big problem. But when you talk about battery swapping per se, for the commercial use cases, standardization is a big problem there, because when the government intends to standardize the battery packs, it limits the what kind of cells that you can use, what kind of technology it would use, the type of connector that you can use. And at this point, market has 6 to 8 types of connectors, and given the exposure to heat and other conditions, one should not standardize every aspect of it, because that would impede innovation at some point. So I think for battery swapping standardization to happen, what a new initiative that Bureau of Energy Efficiency has taken is a very welcome step, where they are thinking of coming up with a star rating of batteries, and ensuring that better batteries are getting subsidies. So that's another smart move by the government to ensure that better performing vehicles get the demand incentives, better performing vehicles. And since better performing vehicles would come out, it would enhance the user experience, and the willingness for the first time buyer for EVs would also go up there. But when I move to the 4-wheeler side, I think all the misconception has been that the charging infrastructure business is not a money-making business at this point. It's not a financial viable, because the amount of investment that you do on the upstream power side, installing a transformer and so on and so forth, and there are limited number of vehicles. So what we see there is particular, the role of siting becomes really important. After central governments taking the lead and states announcing lucrative incentives for EVs, it's important to place the limited charging infrastructure right. So that, for example, in what has happened in India's case for charging infrastructure in FAME 2, locations were predetermined. The local municipal corporations would submit for locations and ask for subsidies without mapping whether it's a major travel route, it's a major trip destination endpoint, what are the major form factors that apply on that road, and you end up placing a charger where it perhaps will never be utilized. So I think what becomes important to resolve that puzzle is how do you site these charging infrastructure, and that would bring in the financial viabilities. But on the standardization aspect, I think the industry and the government has been very clear that there are all the 3 global standards: the CCS, the CHAdeMO, and the GB by T, and that there is a conscious choice that the Indian ecosystem is now moving towards the CCS part. Although it's not explicit, the Ministry of Power guidelines allows for all 3 of them, but the moves that the vehicle OEMs have taken and the government as well. So I think there is a conscious agreement that the CCS is the standard where industry is going to move. So I think that's how we look at it. But in terms of when you see any barriers happening, so I think there is also a mismatch when Ranveer says that I think Niti Aayog have done that study, that even the sticker price is at parity for 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers. And what we are subsidizing is subsidizing the charging infra for a segment which has not achieved parity. So if you want to achieve enable or unlock adoption, you should subsidize charging infrastructure for the first phase for vehicular segments where price parity has also been achieved, both on a TCO and with the sticker price. And that will give some kind of a confidence to the end user to choose EVs as either the first vehicle or the next buying as well. So I think that's how we look at it. I would be happy to answer any questions or any counter things that you might have. But this is how we are thinking. The charging infrastructure is getting to a good shape in India. It's becoming more and more adequate. Yes, for intercity travel, for the highway part of it, you still need charging infrastructure, but home charging is going to be the solution going forward, particularly for the two-wheelers and three-wheelers. Over to you, Mati.
Just this point that you made towards the end on sticker prices at parity for two and three wheelers, and we are subsidizing for a segment which hasn't achieved parity. And then, for two wheelers, mostly home charging should happen. So what should be subsidized charging for which segment?
So I think one thing, what problem that we encounter with home charging in particular, for example, Delhi is one of the states where utilities are most advanced. Whenever any discoms, so the EVs are being sold for that they have most economical running costs, and that gives the end user an advantage there. But if I'm not able to get an special EV tariff that the government announces, and I end up charging it at either a commercial tariff, or because of my home charging, I'm pushed into a consumer energy slab where I ended up paying more for my home consumption as well. So these are on-ground concerns faced by the EV buyers. So another way here to subsidize for is getting that grid EV ready. So the role of utilities so far in the charging infrastructure entire domain has not come out really well. They're gonna be the front or the torch bearers here. In terms of getting that grid EV ready and ensuring that every home would be able to get a separate EV connection and so forth. On the parity aspect of it, what we are trying to say is, look, electric four-wheelers does make a sense for a commercial use case for a fleet operator and so forth. But for a private use case, it's still an expensive proposition, mainly because of the high sticker price that it carries. And that we have seen even from our past experiences of high energy efficient consumer appliances. For example, why 5-star air conditioners were not able to picked up really well in the initial phase because of the high sticker price that they carry, or even though they promise savings over time. So, but the chargers that we are commissioning under FAME 2 and the various state governments charging scheme are catering only to the specific four-wheeler use cases where we are either installing DC001 or we are installing 50 kilowatt CCS, and then for the buses, which is 122 kilowatt. Nothing major has happened on the two-wheeler and three-wheeler charging infrastructure requirement. So if the price parity has been achieved and we want more two-wheelers and three-wheelers on road, let's I think every 3 kilometers that what the government envisages, we should have a charging point for three-wheelers and two-wheelers to give that consumer that sense of a confidence and take away the question of charge anxiety. Often we have talked about the range anxiety aspect of it, but what consumer perception also happens is what if I run out of charge? So that needs to take care of charge anxiety, and these has to be fast as well. And a two-wheeler rider would not stop there for half an hour and plug it. So even for 5 to 10 minutes, an opportunity charge would serve his purpose. So I think that's how the charging priorities needs to be placed properly going forward.
Understood, Nitish. That's clear. I think, yeah, the clarification was important. But let me also just move on. And at this point, Abhinav, bring you and CW that way is quite a distinct organization in the sense that you also look at things from a broader energy transition GHG emission reduction point of view, you must have looked at EVs not just from the point of view of decarbonization, but also economic recovery, but then bringing it down to the level of what are the attitudes that you see among consumers and where everything fits in the puzzle. But given your work on this, what is it that you will have to say both in terms of what the survey revealed on consumer perception, but also what CW's own recommendations are on transport decarbonization and some of the main things to be addressed?
Sure. Thanks, Aarti. So let me just share a quick presentation because that just shows the key findings. And in many ways, it mirrors what you have found as well. So I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, you can put it in presentation mode, but it's visible.
Okay. So this was a survey that we carried out back in 2019, and a pan-India survey. We had about 3,600 samples, and it was representative of at the zonal level. So we had the north, northeastern, south, west, and so on. And we had about 6 metro cities, 16 tier 1 cities, and 38 tier 2 cities. I'm not spending too much time on the descriptive statistics, but the aim was to be as representative as possible on various demographic characteristics. So I want to just talk about some of the key data points, which then showed us that possibly people don't understand EV technology, just as was revealed in your survey as well. So when we asked them about their commute distances, the one-way commute distance was 10 kilometers for the vast majority of them. That means in a day, they are doing about 20 kilometers, right? And even if we look at, this is of course all kinds of mode users, right? Whereas if we take car users, it was still 20. And if we took two-wheelers, it was about 16 kilometers. Another thing, a relevant question that we asked was around, what is the most important feature for you when you're purchasing a new vehicle? Not surprising, again, fuel economy, which is mileage essentially, and by extension, how much they spend on refueling or on the fuel part of it, and of course, then the purchase cost. And then we also asked all of these folks, and this was 2019 again, before the pandemic and before a lot of policies have been introduced in the past couple of years. So probably we would expect awareness to be low, but still 90% said they were familiar. When they said they were not familiar, we would explain what an electric vehicle is. 70% said they are most likely to purchase an EV, that's their next purchase. 95% said they support all of the policies that have been in place. But yet, when we ask them about advantages and disadvantages of EVs, what we gathered is that, they probably don't, understand it as well as we think they do, right? So one is that air pollution and climate change were the highly rated advantages of EVs. You would expect, considering that they've already mentioned mileage is a key criteria, that they would cite the lower cost and lower maintenance cost as the biggest advantage. And this is what we see in surveys carried out globally, especially in the EU, where people are among EV users, that when they are asked the same question, they cite the lower cost as the biggest advantage. It's not that air pollution impact and climate change is not important, but as an EV or as a private user, this is the most important thing that comes about usually. So there we saw a sort of a disconnect there. Similarly, when we asked about disadvantages of EVs, most people said lack of adequate charging infrastructure. Again, point has already been discussed, but in our survey, the same respondents said they are traveling only 20 kilometers in a day. So certainly all of the EV models that were available in the market at that point also were doing about 80 to 100 kilometers. So they can rely exclusively on home charging. And so the lack of charging infrastructure shouldn't be an issue. But again, that was the biggest barrier that they cited, as opposed to high upfront cost, which is what we would expect, right? If they did understand EVs in the market, did understand the technology, they would have ideally cited that. So this is kind of the disconnect that was revealed from the survey, that they were all familiar, they were all excited, but somehow when you test them on the specifics, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect. I would also add here that, so that's all in terms of the presentation. I will just exit this. Oh, sorry.
You can
Sorry.
stop your screen.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, yeah, stop sharing. Yeah, in terms of the EV transition, what we found in the rest of the studies is that it's not just good for the people, the EV users at the end of the day. It also has positive impact for the economy overall, but also for the auto industry. So we did some estimations of the value addition change that would come about when we transition to 30% EVs. We looked at estimation of job numbers. So on virtually every metric, what we found was that it is good for the economy, good for the auto industry as well. There were, of course, certain drawbacks in terms of existing ICE manufacturing jobs would be lower in the future. The value addition from petroleum, for instance, would go down and so on. But the overall picture was that it's positive because of the health benefits as well as but another sort of key concern that emerged was also how the public finances would be impacted, because today both state and the union government derive a lot of their revenues from petroleum fuel tax. And that is certainly something that would be in the decline. And we do need some ways of addressing that before it becomes a bottleneck for the whole transition. But also specifically responding to this issue of resale value as being cited, that is certainly a valid concern. What we see, and especially in the Maharashtra EV policy, is that this is actually being addressed, wherein the policy incentivizes OEMs that offer the buyback guarantee. And you need a buyback guarantee for the battery as well, specifically, or some sort of second life for the battery as well. So this is one of the ways in which the government can actually stimulate the second-hand market to offer incentives to OEMs that offer buyback. But what we see globally, and maybe this is not a solution suited for India, is that France, Netherlands, and Germany also offer incentives specifically for second-hand purchase. Or rather, they say that it is applicable to new EVs as well as second-hand purchase as well. So there's subsidy that gets extended there. So in India, considering we already have, and as Ravneet already mentioned, government has already done whatever it can. Maybe this is a stretch to extend it to also second-hand EVs. But I think the Maharashtra EV policy is probably a good template in that sense. Coming to the issue of the pickup and acceleration, so certainly this is an awareness issue, because there's no doubt that the very first thing that you experience when you use an EV is the acceleration. That is really the tangible difference that you feel. So on this front, I would say, the campaign that the Delhi government is running, for instance, which is the Switch Delhi campaign, and such campaigns would eventually result in creating this kind of awareness. So wherein you're told, or you become aware that it's not just about the economic, it's not just about the environmental benefits, but it's good for your own pocket. And at the same time, the whole experience of using EVs is going to be different. So it was interesting to note that a lot of people said they're excited about the smart features and the navigation features. I think this is very key. An EV two-wheeler or a car is not just a car or two-wheeler, right? Or without a fuel tank. It is much more than that in terms of the experience of using it. You're going to have all these smart navigation features and so on, but also a lot of value-add services that could be bundled. Your vehicle will tell you when it needs to be serviced. Your vehicle will contact the OEM and make the arrangements for you. So there's a whole bunch of possibilities which we may not seeing today, but which are likely to emerge as we go forward. And I'd just like to take the analogy of the switch from cellular phones to smartphones. Yes, it was expensive, but there was also a big trade-off in the sense that you had the phones lasting you for at least a week, right? Or at least a few days. Whereas when you switch to smartphone, and even today, it lasts you just for a single day of charge, and you have to charge it every day. But you don't find people complaining about it anymore. You don't people find reminiscing the fact that the battery lasted for several days. That's because the smartphone offers a lot more than your cellular phone did, and people are willing to overlook this behavioral change that they have to do. And it's going to be the same with EVs. Yes, the charging pattern, time could reduce, but there is going to be a behavior change. You still need to charge every day. And yes, it might be inconvenient in the beginning, but given the whole host of features that an EV will offer in terms of the experience of using the vehicle, I think people will start overlooking this. So it's only, I think there needs to be maybe opportunities for consumers to experience and trial the vehicle as well. And in addition to awareness campaigns, maybe OEMs can also, and I think Ather already does this, which is offer the experience centers. I think these are things that will potentially accelerate or address some of these misconceptions as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Abhinav. Interesting points about how technology changes and then you have less to complain. I mean, in reality, it just feels that given the prices of petrol and diesel, we are only moving our cars from petrol pump to petrol pump. So, if EVs were to come in and offer something different, then given everything else is not so burdensome, maybe in 3 or 5 years, that will become the natural way to progress. And I don't know if I'm right or wrong in saying this, but the fact that, Randeep was talking about EU's Green Deal and it's basically a fit for 55 package and they're really going to change how they produce and consume energy. And if a lot of that will mean just new technology taking over, and once the Volkswagens and the BMWs and the Audis of the world change how they operate, I think the rest just throw the line in some form or fashion. But things will really come down from there as well to some extent. I wonder why no one said anything in the survey, and it didn't occur to me before, on just like less urban clutter and less noise, and just sitting in an EV, that whole experience of soundlessness, especially as a Delhiite is immense. And maybe that's something also for at least some percentage of people to actually buy an EV, just because it's absolutely just soundless on the road, and the amount of urban clutter that we have. And of course, it's not pollution reduction like that, but yes, certainly noise pollution reduction. But in any case, that's more about the cars that I was mentioning this in the spirit of. But Akhilesh, it's time for you to come in, and we worked with you closely to quite an extent. You've also been very closely involved, at least with the Gujarat government, and you keep a view on what their power and transport policies are. I have a few things to ask, especially also because you're last but not the least speaker. Ranveer talked about adoption being an issue, and the phrase that he used, we're still languishing at 1% adoption, and essentially it's lack of supply. So what does that mean in your view? There is a question in the chat, but also something that each of the panelists have said about the total cost of ownership. Is there anything that you can speak to which rests the debate on how total cost of ownership does make sense economically for at least two-wheelers and three-wheelers, if that's possible? And last, my question is that, for example, we've discussed state policies. Gujarat has given its state policy. What is your view on how things are happening from there? For example, is there public interest in EVs since the state policy has come out, or these things make no difference in the short term?
Okay, that's a lot of ground to cover. I'll do my best given the given the shortage.
You can take 5-7 minutes, because we will also want to open the floor once for 2-3 minutes.
Right. I'll start with the last question, because that's something we've been intimately associated with for the last 3 years. And so the short answer to your question is yes, there's been a lot of not just interest, but also the sales have drastically increased once we've announced the Gujarat electric vehicle policy. I mean, just in terms of to the consumer, this is really a bonus, right? If you look at, I think it was Ather that said that Ather is now cheapest in Gujarat after the subsidy. And a lot of OEMs have come to us and actually said that, this is really a very important demand incentive, a very important incentive for consumers, especially in the form of demand incentives. Not just Ather, Hero, all the entire cross section of OEMs across the country. I think it was very important. So a lot of people questioned giving such extensive demand incentives, especially when, especially the two-wheeler and the three-wheeler segment, not just the TCO, which is the total cost of ownership over the lifetime of the vehicle, fuel cost, maintenance included, but also on the capex front. Already EVs are cost competitive with their IC counterparts in the same function and features, right? So you can't compare let's say a Honda Activa and an Ather 450. That's just not the right comparison to make. But you can compare, for instance, a Honda Activa and a Hero Optima or something like that. So in that 55 to 75 range band. And if you see that band, right, it already made sense. So we were asked by a lot of people in the transport department, why are you even proposing such high incentives? And I think this ties into what Ravneet said. We are at the tipping point. I think it's no more about awareness. It's really no more about TCO. It's just waiting to happen. And we just at that cusp. And so I think we thought, at least from Gujarat, to give a very strong indication to consumers and OEMs, of course, that come and manufacture and come and supply in Gujarat. And for consumers saying that, start adopting EVs now, not a year later. Especially in light of the pandemic, we thought that this is the right time to do it. And that explains the high volume of subsidies. I mean, just going by the numbers, within 1.5 years, 18 months, we assume that the subsidy will run out and we will need a revised budgetary allocation from the State Department. So that's how it's looking in terms of sales. In terms of TCO, the second question is really nobody looks at TCO. That's why do you and I buy products, right? So of course there is the bottom of the pyramid that have very different drivers, but we're really not addressing them through any of our discussions here. Why do you and I buy products? And if you really look at consumer psychology, we just do it for two main reasons. One is belongingness. Belongingness is I buy because my brother has, my sister has, my neighbor has, we want to belong to a group. The second reason why we buy is exclusivity. Yes, I also have it, but you know what? Mine is bigger than yours. Mine is slightly better than yours. I have this feature. So these are the two main reasons, belongingness and exclusivity. And for EVs, unfortunately, we don't have to, because it's a nascent technology, we don't need to belong to anybody. Nobody has it. So I don't need to keep up with the Jones, right? I don't need to. And so that's where we need, when transitioning to any new technology, we need to be exclusive. We need to show that through this technology, my self-worth somehow increases. And I think that's what Tesla has done. And I think that's what Ather is doing very successfully. The sense of cool factor is significantly higher when you buy it. This was not the case even 2 years back. The lead acid counterparts of all, I mean, Gujarat has been running a EV subsidy scheme, and it really never took off because the products were really bad, right? The slow speed electric vehicle, nobody wants to drive that. I mean, nobody wants to even sit on that and be considered cool. That's the last thing that people think of. So I think that game has changed now, and through Ather and many other, even the geared segment, we are seeing really good startups coming in, especially in Gujarat. I think that's going to change in the next 2 years. So we don't have to consider it. But for the purpose of that question asked by the gentleman, in terms of a running cost, if you look at an Honda Activa segment, you're looking at 2+ rupees per unit and going up with fuel prices heading north. EVs will be less than half a rupee, even less, right? So 20 paisa or so. So it just makes sense from a fuel or operative on the operating costs. That's not even a comparison. Same thing in three-wheelers. Three-wheelers are much cheaper to run, and also with four-wheelers. But four-wheelers, because of the cost price, and also you're looking at a significant, a very different band. There's a very little difference in affordability from a 60,000 to 80,000 versus an 8 lakh car to a 16 lakh car. So you're talking about a very significant jump. So the psychology is very, very different. So I think in the two-wheeler and three-wheeler just makes sense. So those of you in the audience, go and buy an EV. Don't even consider an ICE for your next purchase. But on the four-wheeler, I think we need battery, given the fact that the battery sizes are larger, we need to see scale effects in battery and prices coming down. And I think that will take a little more time. And therefore the model, even the OEMs, we just don't have models like Suzuki, Maruti Suzuki, the most widely sold car in India. They don't have an EV model as of now. Right? So that'll take time. On the first question, Aarti, you'll have to repeat because I forgot the first question.
I basically reiterated what Ravneet had said, which was about adoption is really with lack of supply. But I think that's the point that you address about OEMs right now, and it's mostly a catch-22.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so at this moment, from the state government's perspective, we just want people to come here, manufacture and supply. Just we need more models, as clear as that. And we need models catering to all range of consumers. That's what we need. That's the urgent need. And so I think we've solved the problem, to be honest. Decarbonization of transport is there. I mean, we're at the cusp of a revolution.
May I ask you one follow-up question? And it just occurred to me that, a lot of people who are working on the climate policy issue talk about zero emission vehicle mandates that should happen, at least in the lead up to the COP, which is the Conference of Parties. Last year it was missed. This year it will happen in the UK. There is going to be a day where it's a day of EVs and transport, and naturally a lot of states or cities or actors or corporates will come up and talk about zero emission vehicle mandates. Is that kind of a thing possible in India? I mean, of
No.
course, we have 30% by 2030 and that target, but yes, go on.
The short answer is no. A great parallel is, I mean, in India, we have regulations, a lot of rules and regulations, but very little is enforced. Great example is the RPOs, or the renewable purchase obligations for, on the energy side, which we've been tracking closely. India is one of the fastest growing, I think the third after China and US, in terms of solar and wind installations. None of that has happened because of the RPO framework. None of the DISCOMs, including Gujarat, has successfully, consistently met their RPOs for the last 10 years. So we are installing it despite the RPOs, not because of them. And so it just goes to show that the enforcement angle in India is extremely, extremely weak. And so it's not going to work. But what is going to really work is other factors, other driving factors. Consumer interest in shifting to something much cooler, much more economical. I think economy is a huge factor. Today, solar and wind is much cheaper, right? So if Ola or Ather is setting up a factory in Gujarat, in whichever state, it's just cheaper to get open access power on solar and wind. It just is, right? Of course, there are a lot of barriers, but today wind and solar at a retail price, especially for large consumers, is much cheaper. And so you would do it. You wouldn't talk about corporate sustainability. You have all of that on your website. It sounds cool, but it just makes economical sense. And I think the same dynamics will start playing out, are playing out, in fact, for the EV segment. I think does it answer your question?
It does. And that's fully correct. I mean, in the end, whichever transition will happen will be largely driven by the economics of what makes sense, and given the situation that there is very less cash also with the government to put it out from the pocket as such, things have to make sense economically. And I think that goes across all levels. But we are literally on the top of the hour. I also did not see too many questions in the chat, so we are in a good space. But I do want to thank each one of you for taking out your time, contributing to the survey findings. I must say, we did it for the first time. We haven't worked in the EV space before. We are going to do lots more on the Clean Mobility Shift platform, of which we will we'll be in touch with you. Feel free to be contributing writers there and partners and collaborators in what we are trying to do there. But most of all, thank you to all the panelists for coming in and sharing your very interesting insights. Thanks very much, and I will call it a close. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. Pleasure being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.